Hi, Blairling.
Is it just you and me?
Zoe's hopping on in a second.
Let's just have Wild Mercy, Winona versus Blair from 50 feet away. Hey.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to read one, which is like 12 pages long, single space, but little book. So that'll probably take like 25 minutes, I bet.
Yeah, that is perfect.
Yeah. Great.
Perfect. All right. We'll see. Oh, Chandra just entered the waiting room. Hello.
How do you pronounce your name?
Hi, I just started to introduce myself and realized I was muted. Hi, I'm Chandra.
Chandra.
Blair and Winona.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Are you guys Canvas editors?
Zoe and I are the Canvas editors, and Blair is the other reader tonight. Hi, Zoe.
Hi.
Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Chandra. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. Yay.
It's been a while.
I know. It's been a while. This is so cool, you guys. I'm so glad you're keeping Wild Mercy going against all odds.
Everyone needs some environmental writing right now.
Yeah,
it's really nice.
This way people from all over can zoom in, so, Oh, we're not going to let Rick enter the waiting room, and he's staying in the waiting room.
Yeah. Did you ever figure out why people were able to
I don't know why the players
in?
got in. They weren't supposed to. I still don't understand. But whatever. We'll see who makes it in this time.
Do you think you'll keep the Zoom going once you're doing it in person next year? And just like put up a laptop in the back of the room kind of thing?
That could be cool. Yeah, that's up to Zoe.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I have had to do a lot of hybrid Zoom in practice with Writ 101. So if I had to do it, I could. Not as scary as it used to be.
Who else is in the waiting room? Oh, Seamus is in the waiting room.
Yeah.
Yes.
Blair, are you in the UM flat right now?
Yeah. My internet didn't work last time. So I left the main house that Winona's in right now. And
we live together, but we're on separate Zooms.
Yeah. I'm over in the studio.
That's great. That's great.
So this would usually be the backdrop, this wall.
Yeah. Totally. It looks so familiar.
Chandra or Blair, do either of you have any questions about it? It's pretty much going to be me introducing the event, and then Zoe or I will read your bio, and then up to you. Cool.
Do we have, so am I introducing Chandra with my own personal bio, or do we have one? I couldn't find it in my email. I don't know why.
I don't know.
I resent it to you, Zoe, just after you sent me that. I resent it.
Why am I not? I haven't gotten it.
Okay, so I just
weird.
Literally, maybe I'll send it from a personal email.
Okay, and also you can try using my Gmail too that you have from Shift. That might, maybe for some reason my UM one isn't.
Okay.
Okay, well, I'll do Blair and you do Chandra.
Okay.
Okay, Zoe, I'm sending it to your Gmail from my Gmail, and hopefully that'll work.
Okay.
Yeah, I sent it like as soon as you asked for it.
That's so weird.
I know. That's all right.
Maybe our emails just don't like each other.
It happens. That happens all the time. It's so strange.
Weird. Yeah, I'm still not getting it. I don't understand.
They give it a minute. I just sent it. Give it a
Okay.
second. You could always just.
I refreshed it.
Okay.
I mean, I was just going to talk about how great of a teacher you are, so that's pretty much a bio, but we'll see if it comes.
Oh. I mean, we could also, there's one on the Free Flow website.
Okay.
That you could use. That's basically, I'll send that link in the, Zoe, I'll put it in the chat.
Oh yeah. Okay, that sounds good. And then I can.
Oh my gosh.
For some reason.
All of our resources.
I'm just gonna wait some more minutes so that we don't have random people jumping in while someone's talking.
Sounds good. Oh, beautiful.
Fashionably late.
Yeah, fashionably late. But I will write in chat.
Cool. So I'll read it, but then people will also be able to read it. It's perfect. Wait, they can see the chat before they're in?
You're right. Maybe they can.
I was like, cool, Winona. We will start soon.
Who knows? I don't know. There's a little
Maybe they
message
can.
when they're locked in the waiting room. There's a little message telling them we'll be
Okay,
starting
perfect.
shortly too. So yeah. Also, I realized that since we're recording it, all of our little banter beforehand is also recorded. So I don't think we said anything bad last time, but just Claire got in again.
Claire's
Claire,
back.
what the heck? Why did you get in? You're supposed to be.
I just keep
waiting.
copying and pasting.
I don't understand how you do that.
Everyone
Sorry, I don't
else
have
is
my video
waiting
on 'cause I, like,
patiently,
just
and
got out of the
Claire's just-
I just keep copying and pasting the meeting number that's at the end of the link, and it just sends me right here.
But
That's
you had to let everyone else in. Not
I
you.
know. I don't know. Talk amongst yourselves though. Don't mind me.
Oh dear.
Hi, Claire.
Hey, Chandra.
I'm glad you're here early.
Hey, yeah. You gave you some kind of weird VIP status that no one else can control, but I'm cool with it.
Zoe, do you want to pin the speaker again?
Oh yeah, the spotlight.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, that worked really well last time. I'm glad they have that function.
Yeah. Glad you figured it out because I didn't.
It was not that intuitive. I hope I remember how to do that actually. Or I think I remember.
Have you guys been getting a lot of people that show up?
Oh, Susan. I don't understand.
Yeah, I feel like last week we had close to 20. So it was pretty good turnout.
Mm.
I want to start admitting other people.
Okay.
Giving faces.
Then I can make sure the spotlighting, I know how to do it.
We'll be starting in just a second, everyone. All right, everyone, I think we're going to get started. Welcome to Wild Mercy. I'm Winona, and you can see Zoe in her little Zoom box over there. We're the co-editors of CAMUS, which is part of the Environmental Studies Department, and we're really glad you're here with us tonight. For those of you who might not be familiar with Wild Mercy, it's a reading series put on by CAMUS where student readers and local writers present their work. Obviously, due to the pandemic, we're having it on Zoom this year, but it's typically held at the UM Flat. Hopefully, those of you that are in Missoula will be able to actually experience Wild Mercy in person next year. However, while we're still on Zoom, the silver lining is that we can have family and friends from out of state join us. Before we get started, just a couple things. If you're an audience member, try to make sure your microphone is off so it doesn't disturb the readers. If you want to unmute to cheer at the end, that's totally fine. Also, if you're comfortable having your video on, we'd encourage that because it helps it feel like a little more of a community for the readers. So on that note, I'm going to hand it off to Zoe to introduce Chandra.
Thanks, Winona. So I'm really happy to get to introduce Chandra. I met her through one of her free flow courses over the winter, and it was such a great experience, and she's just such a good teacher. So that's not part of her bio, but I want to share that because it's very true. But Chandra is a writer, river guide, and educator originally from the Matanuska Valley of Alaska. She holds a bachelor's degree in art education and Spanish education from Montana State University and a master's of science in environmental writing from U of M. Whoop, whoop. As an educator, Chandra has spent many years working in the public school system, teaching the arts, Spanish, and English. She has worked within the realm of river conservation since her 2010 Fulbright grant to Ecuador, and she founded Free Flow Institute in 2017, which you should all check out because it's great. Chandra worked as senior editor at CAMUS magazine, and her writing has been featured in a number of publications, most of them fairly river-centric. Chandra, her sweetheart Nate, and their handsome canine companions Arlo and Bandit are all happily home-based in Missoula, where they do a lot of skiing, kayaking, and pizza eating together. And from there, I'll hand it off to you, Chandra.
Thank you, Zoe. Thanks for that lovely introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be back at Wild Mercy. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So tonight I'm going to read an essay that I wrote about a year ago that is about, it actually just came out in this magazine, Adventure Journal. And I'm just going to read straight from the magazine because I don't actually have this opportunity very often. It feels really special. And in February of 2020, I took a trip down the Rio Grande with the man who taught me to row boats when I was 18 years old. And this trip was really transformative for me. So without further ado, I'll read it. It's about 4,000 words long. I hope that's not too much of your time. It's called Language Lessons on the Rio Grande. To comprehend the geography of Rio as border, it may be best to start in El Paso, Texas. El Paso and its infamous Mexican sister to the south, Ciudad Juarez, bleed together, a channelized urban river and fortified border tracing contours through crowded architecture. From El Paso, the Rio Grande forms the meandering natural border between nations until it reaches the Gulf of Mexico. According to the 1848 Treaty of Hidalgo, the boundary is the Thalweg, the deepest part of the deepest channel of the Rio Grande. Most Mexicans refer to this overly appropriated desert artery as the Rio Bravo, bravo meaning fierce or angry or agitated. The Rio Grande has other older names too, from the languages that labeled this landscape long before Spanish and English outcompeted native dialects for their places here. Then from El Paso, it's 5 hours southeast to the Big Bend of Texas. Along the way, you'll drive through several Homeland Security checkpoints, under one military-style surveillance blimp, past a dozen Border Patrol rigs, and eventually you'll veer off Highway 10 and reroute toward Mexico, toward the dusty counterculture stronghold of Terlingua. And then you'll see Terlingua and the Big Bend are truly remote, wild, and removed from urban chaos the type of place where you can hide, where you can disappear into the hazy distance between mesas. Here, where dust and heat and drought mandate slower movement, my friend Bobski has made a home in the style of the modern West Texas settler, a one-room bunker with corrugated metal siding meant to deflect the rays of the desert sun, with an open-air kitchen and a Connex storage container on site. Bobski has carefully worn a faint mile-long loop through the chaparral around his little house. Laundry dries stiff as plywood on the sun-bleached line. He hauls water from the faucet at Desert Sports, the mountain biking and river outfitter he's guided with for the last 20 years. Bobski, who is 21 years my senior and whose real name is Robert Gray, saw me through my parents' divorce, my college graduation, grad school graduation, through several breakings of my patchwork heart, through the death of one oversized Labrador named Parker, and the last 14 years with my sweet anvil-headed lab, Arlo. I picture Bobski cozied in fleece with curly brown ponytail, snaking out from beneath one of those old triangular Patagonia stocking caps that came to a point above his skull, like the hat of a bishop. Bobski also taught me to drink coffee and to enjoy whiskey. My sweetheart Nate and I made our first trip to Terlingua in February 2020. Bobski and I had gone 6 years without seeing one another, 6 years since we last drank beers together in Alaska, 6 years since I'd changed my mind about spending summers in a dry suit, guiding rafts on the silty runoff of glaciers before I'd retired to working 1 or 2 trips a year in the Grand Canyon. Bobski still returns to Alaska each summer. He doesn't mind going to work each day in a Gore-Tex sack, or the mosquitoes, or the insomniac sun, or the commute from the lower 48. And his is no paltry journey. For the past 30 years, Bobski has migrated like a Canada goose between Terlingua and Anchorage. In Denali, he keeps a gutted stationary bus with a wood-burning stove, a lazy boy recliner, and his fishing tackle. He works fly-out river trips in the Brooks Range, fishing trips on the Kenai and in Bristol Bay, and industrialized whitewater rafting trips for well-fed cruise line tourists on Denali Park's Nenana River. When the season is over, Bobski returns to Big Bend to guide canoe trips on the Rio Grande. On February 13th, I rode in a van trailing 3 canoes into the Panther Junction Visitor Center parking lot in Big Bend National Park. Bobski's Canadian partner, Katie, who runs a bike shop in Ontario in the summertime, rode in the front seat, watching the rosy-colored landscape with the focus of someone who gets carsick easily. Bobski began to guide us, as most old river guides tend to do. He narrated the geology of Big Bend, Mariscal Mountain, Sierra del Carmen Limestone, Mount Emery, the tallest peak in the Chisos Range, Sierra del Caballo Muerto, the Dead Horse Mountains. Big Bend occupies the southern reach of the Laramide orogeny, named after the Laramie Mountains of Wyoming. An orogeny is the event wherein mountains are created. It's what happens when 2 plates collide at the boundary of 2 converging slabs of crust. Mountains are often formed at the edges of plates, at borders. And although we perceive them as timeless, they were, just like you, me, and Bobski, born. These mountains along the border between the US and Mexico, they are what emerged from worlds clashing together. Orogeny implies origin, and I think of the genesis of names, words, and of people, of our individual trajectories, of mountains, of rivers. Our destination that February morning was Boquillas Canyon. Boca means mouth. Boquillas then, little mouths or funnels or portals. Maybe it refers to the myriad local hot springs, steaming apertures scattered across the region. Or, Bobski joked as we wrestled our canoes against an assertive afternoon wind, maybe it means place where the breeze is born. The place where I grew up in Alaska is named for Chief Wasilla, a respected Dena'ina Athabascan leader. Though the origin of Chief Wasilla's name is disputed, there's some common acceptance of the translation as breath of air, or as Bobski used to say, cool breeze. He nicknamed my best friend from high school Breezy after our hometown. One rainy, early season day in Denali, many years ago, Bobski recruited me to help him pack hypothermia kits into large dry bags. The bags were filled with discarded layers of wool and fleece, and each river guide had to carry one kit on their raft. Each kit had a number sharpied on it. Bobski gave me kit number 1, and then he proceeded to call me number 1 from that day forward. That's his nickname for me, number 1. We launched at Rio Grande Village shortly after noon. We passed the riverside village of Baquillas del Carmen. On our right, sometime during the heat of that first day, and then later a crossing where horses, local guides, and ferrymen await visitors beneath thatched roof palapas. Boquillans sell bent wire peacocks, beaded scorpion figurines, and knit beer koozies that read "No al muro," no to the wall. Any American tourist with a passport may visit Boquillas, patron a cafe, and return to Texas in time for ribs and Lone Star lagers. Most of the villagers to the south, however, lack the necessary documents to venture beyond the northern bank. After 9/11, the US closed this crossing, costing the park almost $300,000 annually in revenue from both sides of the river. Southbound travelers en route to Mexico and Boquillans trudging north to buy provisions in Texas. For the next 11 years, Boquillas was isolated to the point of starvation. Boquillas is yet without electricity and is debilitatingly remote. The nearest town with groceries is 150 miles away. Drought killed the last few crops and goats that can be cultivated in this landscape. Kind-hearted Texans snuck food and supplies across the border. Boquillans left figurines on the bank with honesty jars, hoping their neighbors to the north might take a scorpion and leave $1. In 2013, the crossing reopened, this time with a $2 million customs facility and computerized passport control managed remotely by officials in El Paso. Without scannable barcoded passports, Boquillans, unless they choose to defy the law, are all but stranded on their side of the river. Yet the border along the Rio Grande is naturally porous, and this is somehow comforting. The potential for the physical exchange of people and goods and ideas across an inherently permeable riverine membrane feels almost magical when lines and laws and otherwise dictate migration, movement, and the direction of dreams. What a thing it is to float between two countries. On river left, Big Bend National Park, West Texas, USA. This is public land, where Americans and our visitors can wander among the ghosts of dinosaurs, where arroyos incised in ancient limestone invite the vibram-clad feet of walkers, and where maps and visitor centers direct our attention toward the secrets of an increasingly fragile and isolated ecosystem. And on river right, northern Chihuahua, Mexico, a world away, removed from the rules and structure and protection of American administration by a thin green line of river. At camp that first night, the wind was incessant. We slept on the Mexican side, on river right. Technically, it's not legal, Bobski explained, but here in the canyon, we don't see too many people. We decided to name this site Fisherman's Grotto, La Gruta del Pescador, after a stony respite 100 yards up from the beach, where two limestone escarpments offer protection for an evening fire. Tucked away in the grotto was a sleeping bag ravaged by desert creatures, its innards spilling onto the sand and tangling with a wad of fine mesh fishing net. There were also some bleach and detergent bottles, presumably repurposed as scoops. At the edge of the entrance, Nate spotted a few cans of food, rusted, without labels, yet unopened, half buried in the sand. These objects were clues to a puzzle that was neither ancient nor particularly confounding. He probably floats down from Boquillas village, Bobski said, or maybe he walks down. Either way, the fisherman still uses the site. There are plenty of catfish and carp in the water here. The grotto had an unsettled feeling, like so many places in the Southwest. It was charged with the kind of energy you feel at an archaeological site, Yet this place was undeniably modern, active, important. We built a small fire after dinner, but kept our distance from the fishermen's stashes. The next morning, Valentine's Day, after a walk up Arroyo Puerto Rico, I found a geode on the beach. The layers of the geode were like a tiny topo map, concise, contained by stone. The layers conveyed boundaries, repetitious shapes that define limits, and those limits were held in place by a crust of gunmetal gray that was mottled, as though by lichen, with another copper-colored layer and patches of yet another stone, the color of smoke, or of a dove's feathers. The geode had 6, maybe 7 facets, and on one of them was the window, the opening, la boquilla, to and through a glassy portal to the heart of the thing, to a tiny universe within. Are you going to keep that rock? Bobsky asked me, quietly looking over my shoulder. I nodded, knowing I wasn't supposed to. Good, he said, and descended the beach toward his canoe, his gait stiffer than I'd ever noticed before. River work is layered. For many career river guides, there's the movement, shifting with seasons, the intensity of seasonal community and the longing that comes as the dearest of friends, coworkers, family leave for their respective faraway places when autumn comes. There's the loneliness of detachment, the disassociation from societal norms, the lack of health insurance, layers of shoulds and wishes and if onlys. Bobsky came within a semester of graduating from college. Fittingly, he studied English and philosophy, but he didn't finish. He commented to me on the water one day that now, as he prepares to turn 60 and his body grows tired, his young man choices torment him. What does the twilight of a career feel like when you don't have a safety net of retirement, pension, savings? The summer when I was 19, Bobsky had a beautiful, strong girlfriend named Victoria. I returned to Bozeman for my second year of college. Stay in school, Chandra, she wrote, and I did. As much as I wanted to drop it for full-time river life, I stayed in school and I finished. And I know this made Bobsky proud. Bobsky taught me to row boats almost 2 decades ago. He would ride in the front of my boat while I was training. I'd row him down the Nenana River Canyon, and he'd shift in obvious, excruciating discomfort from one side of the raft to the other, looking at me through the blackest of sunglasses as though I didn't see the rocks we were careening toward. He'd grimace and brace for impact as I flailed on my oars. I was surely made more nervous by his anxiety, but we kept trying. I failed at least 2 checkout runs before I finally passed. Eventually, I was allowed to row shivering, fleshy cargo down the Nenana River. And Bobsky was so pleased, which was the best and most poignant part of the thing. On our February trip through Big Bend, the water was low and green and warm. The river moved slowly, almost reluctantly, and we all slowed to its pace. But the wind was persistent and the canyon walls limited our sun, and I woke up each morning reluctant to get out of my nest. After so many years of subjecting my hands to Alaskan waters in winters, my fingers don't work well when it's cold. My hands become useless clubs and I cannot trust them. I tried though, on this trip, to get up before my friends, to make coffee for Bobsky, to be respectful, to allow KT and Bobsky a sleep in, to deliver green tea to Nate while he was still cozied between our wind-blocking stacks of dry bags. The early mornings, before conversation and beers and the annoyances of tandem canoeing, allowed me time to settle, to review the questions from the day before. There are a lot of questions we cannot answer on the river, despite the library of naturalist books and maps that Bobsky carries in a waterproof box. So we make a list of our questions and resolved to consult the pocket oracle upon our return to cell towers. We wondered if swifts are monogamous, what exactly a duck's eclipse plumage is eclipsing, how to discern between the most prominent layers of limestone in Boquillas Canyon, what the hardest vegetable wax in the world is, etc. We do know that the second hardest vegetable wax is Candelia, a reed-like desert plant whose waxy coating is used globally in things like lip balm, shampoos, chewing gums, and which you can be almost certain was harvested and processed by rural Mexican laborers and transported by burros. On the southern side of the river are the ghosts of the Candelia camps, places in the corridor where Mexican wax makers, candelieros, have dug vats into the earth deep and wide enough to hold 300 gallons of water and sulfuric acid. Heavy, rusted grates cover the vats. Lonesome, no good shoes remain on the beaches, scattered, their fabric eroded, presumably by acid. Also, empty 2-liter soda bottles, the sun-bleached plastic or foil skins of junk foods, bottles of laundry detergent, cotton t-shirts. Some items seem to have been left intentionally, as though the wax maker's return is imminent. And so we never lingered too long. We loaded the trash that we could fit into our canoes and kept moving downstream. There was a strange dichotomy here. The Candelia camps felt ancient, and certainly some of them are. But on our third day, we stopped at one clearly no more than 10 years old and still operational. Of the individual objects found in Big Ben's 26,000 known archaeological sites, which ones are relics, not to be disturbed, precious hints at the answers to our big questions, and which, like the plastic bottles I've shoved beneath my canoe seat, do we condemn as trash? At the border, words behave like swallows, darting, flitting casually through and between languages. Linguistic boundaries dissolve. Ancient Aztec emerges freely through the gaps in the dominant Spanish and English, the three whirling together like currents. On an afternoon walk, we wandered farther up Arroyo Guerrero. Arroyo is canyon, right? Nate asks. A wash, a drainage, a dry channel. And Guerrero is Mexican Spanish for blonde, fair, light, as the rocks here are. Bobsky always used words that shone from beyond the limits of my vocabulary. He referenced books I'd never read and maybe never would. His Spanish, even though I took it in college as a major, was always better, more functional, more spirited than mine. There are cross sections of the river that Bobsky calls concretions, pebble-pocked swaths like sandbars cemented in place. The river flows shallow over these submerged peninsulas, these rainbow rock beaches buried just beneath the surface, and in a canoe you should watch for them. But on foot, walking upstream from camp, they offer an immensely satisfying substrate, solid, predictable, unlike the sandbars of most of the desert rivers I know. On our third night at an expansive, windswept camp, KT and I went upstream, over the concretion and above a brushy island to take a bath out of view from the other members of our party. At the upstream tip of the island, the concretion gave way to a small pool, shallow enough to stand in and deep enough to submerge all your dirty parts, to take a tiny swim. I've not known Bobsky to swim for fun. And I only know of one time when he swam involuntarily. We were on a private winter Grand Canyon trip in 2009 on my permit with some of our best friends. He was the lead boat and I was kayaking, paddling one of those little plastic coffins, as he likes to call kayaks. At Hermit Rapid, we ran in 2 pods, and I was on shore getting into my boat when my barrel-chested friend John Hoschel came running up the beach from the Scout in his tomato red dry suit, yelling, "Bobsky's swimming," and my world for a moment turned upside down. Absolute incongruity. Bobsky does not swim. And when I caught up to him and his rowing frame was bent and he was shaken, cold, and scared, "That 10th wave number 1, he breathed heavily. "She got me." I don't know if Bobsky has taken an involuntary swim since, but I doubt it. Down low, after we came out of the canyon on our 4th day, the walls of Sierra del Carmen limestone were replaced by thickets of giant river cane. The view from river level is limited once you emerge from the canyon. The banks are strangled by cane. As we floated lazily through this dry and sandy jungle, I plucked another 2-liter Coke bottle from a tangled mess of half-submerged reeds and branches on River Right. How many bottles is this now? The effort to eradicate this thirsty, dominated colonizer, Arundo donax, also known as carrizo cane or border bamboo, has bankrolled Bobsky's winters for decades. The control project is funded on the US side by a partnership between Coca-Cola and the World Wildlife Fund. I stared at the bottles littering the floor of my canoe and wondered why the company responsible for producing 3 million metric tons of plastic waste each year, more than 1/5 of the world's PET bottle output, is funding a riverbank restoration project along the border. I don't think anyone who works on these projects thinks of it as vocation, Bobsky said. It's a little bit like the Coalition for a Little Less Corruption in Government. It's more realistic to think of it as a limiting effort. Establish a few big breaks in the huge walls of cane and expose a little sediment to erosion, open up some beach access for visitors, and give species like willows a chance to get a foothold. Arundo and feral burros and Republicans, we probably can't get rid of them, but it should be held in check. Arundo is so aggressive and resilient that it's seemingly impossible to control, despite bulldozing, aerial herbicides, mowing, burning. The USDA even purchased Arundo wasps from Europe, another foreign species, as biocontrol. The wasps lay egg in the cane, hatching larvae that invade the innards of the plant, thereby weakening its colonial ambitions. Embedded within the giant river cane controversy also lurks the issue of human migration. Arundo hides people too. Here you have an invasive plant that the government spends millions of dollars attempting to control that just happens to offer hostile yet effective cover for immigrants attempting to make their way north against the law. Floating on the Rio Grande, you can see the places where people exit the jungle of cane and enter the river corridor. What a relief that water must be for a few moments before they enter the thicket on river left and continue to crawl northward past the opening of the boundary into the desiccated heart of the desert. Our last night on the river, we camped on a beach where you can get high above the cane and see for miles. As KT sipped her sotol by firelight, we watched the moon rise over the mesa, and Bobsky announced that it would be a dewy night. Burros patrolled the bench above us. A beaver, Castor canadensis, thrashed against the water in the dark. The air grew dense and cold and wet. I curled up next to Nate and watched as a halo formed around the moon, La Luna. The next morning, our final day on the Rio, we resorted to lining our canoes past a bend in the river called Pillow Rock. Not like the Class 5 rapid of the same name on West Virginia's Gauley River, but rather a creeping, quiet corner where the water has the potential to slowly siphon a canoe toward a boulder and wrap it there. Low intensity, high frustration, not worth the risk. So I watched Bobsky deftly line his boat and then KT's around the corner, wading into the current within an inch of the top of his extra tough boots, guiding the empty boats toward the safety of the eddy below. When it was my turn, I unfurled our bow line and followed Bobsky's steps, his movements exactly, my heart pounding, certainly because this was dangerous, but because I desperately wanted to do it well. There was no celebration when the boats were all safely below the lurking boulder, but we continued downstream together, and that was good enough. I tucked the geode away in my life jacket and waited until I returned home to Montana to take it out, to roll it over in my fingers, that tiniest of topo maps, the most delicate and perfect of concentric shapes. The lines within the geode are the contours of mountains rising from the edge, the limits that define our memories, the worn paths of circumambulation, the boundaries of the countries we're born into, the lines that tell us how far we can go and by what time we have to be home. We live within and among and between lines. The line of the Rio Grande, the line of the border, fills the liminal space between cultures, governments, and politics. The canyons of the Rio Bravo transcend the concerns of humans. And humans, with all love, daydreams, insecurities, doubts, hopes, belong between the dusty banks. In the space between limestone walls, we are suspended in, supported by the water that defines our country and our very existence. That space holds us in all of our histories, our fears, and our memories, and we are washed downstream with all the rest of it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra.
Oh, welcome.
Thanks, Chandra. That was lovely.
Thank you. It's a fun story to write. Thanks for listening.
Well, without further ado, next up we have Blair Libby. He's completing his master's in environmental studies with a focus in tribal and federal government collaboration. He also recently self-published and hand-bound 100 copies of Westward Tendrils, a collection of creative nonfiction essays reflecting on his experiences hiking the Pacific Northwest Trail. Turn it over to Blair.
Hi. Thank you, Winona. Chandra, that was amazing. I love that. It was a joy to hear. So this is a little book that I made, and I don't know if it's mirrored for you, so everything may be backwards, but it says Westward Tendrils, and this is about a hike that I took a few years back. That was my first time being in Montana. I was fortunate to have these writing workshops through the MS program and forced me to do some writing. So I was able to complete this and work with some artists in town and learn how to bind books and how to do this whole process. And it's been a real joy. It's not really, it's connected to, it's part of my portfolio, but having this creative outlet, which is so separate from the rest of the work I'm doing in this program, has been really special. And it was appropriate that Chandra, you just read about the borderlands. This essay I'm going to read is called Fauna Ensis, like fauna as an animal and ensis as in to be made of, created of. And it sort of splits time between my experiences on the Pacific Northwest Trail and where I used to live in Tucson, Arizona. Our pellet stove is pretty loud, so hopefully you all can hear me well. I'll just read out of this. Fauna Ensis. In bed. Two beams of blue light spotlight two faces. One head teeters on the summit of a leaning three-pillow stack, and the other rests neatly on a single cushion. I am the ascetic. After backpacking with a 1-inch thermarest for 3 months, these days, at home in Tucson, I prefer to sleep with my body on a more even plane. The tiny black dots of our eyes dart in random directions like a pinball machine. It's mostly silent, save for the oddly rhythmic percussion of fingers pressing and sliding across glass phone screens. I sigh, drop the phone on my bare chest, and roll to my side to face Taylor. They're estimating 1 billion animals have died in the Australian bushfires, I say. She turns toward me, and I'm able to see her face before her light beam disappears too. The oversized frames of her glasses magnify her already giant eyes, lips open in disbelief, brows raised. That's horrible, she whispers. We gaze in each other's direction, but only see a black landscape with neon rectangles temporarily stamped into our vision, our retinas having not yet adjusted to the moonless night. Phosphenes, phantom visuals in the darkness. I check the clock, 11:22. We're in her bedroom 30 minutes after deciding it was time to sleep. My left big toe, which is hanging over the edge of the bed, is stabbed by something sharp. Shit, what was that? Again. Ouch! Taylor turns on her phone's flashlight. Remy, the 6-month-old kitten, stares from the foot of the bed, his pupils like supermassive black holes, spine arched in a low crouching position, on the hunt for toes of the offending bed thief. I nudge him off the bed and he sprints down the hall into the night. On Cats and Eyes. Conscious vision comprises all the information processed by our visual cortex, the back area of the brain vital to sight. But the data taken in by our eyes doesn't only travel to the visual cortex, it's analyzed elsewhere in the brain too, like in the amygdala, the almond-shaped cluster of nuclei that judges emotional response. A 2013 study examined a stroke survivor with a damaged visual cortex. He was totally blind for all functional purposes, like reading a text. But when the patient was monitored by an MRI scanner presented with photos of faces staring either off to the side or directly at him, the latter photos, staring directly at him, made his amygdala react wildly. The patient had no way to identify any features of the faces, but he could feel himself being stared at. When you have the feeling of being watched from, say, behind you, outside of what your mind is processing as conscious vision, you might be right. Perhaps your eyes are trying to send a message to those darker, deeper, unconscious parts of your mind. It's worth turning around to check. My body's internal clock was betrayed by the daylight that at nearly 9 p.m. still casted light shades of blue above me, a well-worn denim sky. Firs and pines, thin-trunked and densely packed after decades without fire, filtered sideways pillars of dusty July sun into camp. Everything appeared spotted. The ground cover mat of pine needles, the tents, our dirty bodies. I was sitting with M, my hiking partner at the time, outside our tents in the northeast corner of Washington state. A tributary creek to the mighty Pend Oreille River trickled before us, orchestrating a lazy, calming soundscape. But I felt that sensation, the one that raises anticipatory fear in the hairs of my nape, a mysterious feeling of another set of eyes unseen. M saw it first. Oh my God, that's a mountain lion. I turned around. The young but still big cat that stood a few yards in front of me, its back about 30 inches tall, had the shape of a mountain lion, but a coat that resembled something closer to a melanistic leopard or jaguar. Raisin, jet black, and chocolate hues blended into its fur. I questioned the effect of the shadows on my vision. What was the species range? I remembered pre-trip Google search results for mountain lion encounters. Get big. I stood up, followed by M, and it worked. The cat jumped backward, alarmed by either our full height or our hiker stench, and ran down the trail like a bounding shadow, long tail swinging. We turned to each other in disbelief. Mountain lions, Puma concolor, are ubiquitous to most of the Western Hemisphere and thus hold the world record for the most common names of any species. See cougar, puma, catamount, gato monte, red tiger, mountain screamer, painter, and so on. Its closest genetic relatives are hardly neighbors. Leopards are found on the other side of the planet, and jaguar's range barely extends into southern Arizona these days. And I was in Washington, backpacking just a few miles from the Canadian border. It was surely a mountain lion, and to see this reclusive animal so close was astounding in itself. But with its dark coat, we had encountered a mutant mountain lion, an anomaly. The coloring is literally unheard of. The official position of the scientific community, including the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, reads, "There has never been a confirmed or documented case of a melanistic mountain lion in the United States." Within 30 seconds, a snap twig broke our discussion. Behind the same trees as the first cat was another rare occurrence, a second mountain lion. This cougar with the unmistakable characteristic tan coat was the same size, a juvenile, but significantly more emboldened. We were close enough to lock eyes. Wide golden irises peered from around a tree that the first cat had just ran away from. The pupils, initially dilated, narrowed. The cougar lowered its front legs, crouching down. Oculesics, which is the study of eye movement, considers the physiological causes and evolutionary consequences of prolonged direct eye contact. Besides changes in ambient light, human pupils may dilate while looking at someone you love, under the influence of certain drugs, and during flight or fight response. Feline eyes dilate when excited, stimulated, or in fear. The pupils go through meiosis or constriction when the animal is preparing to attack prey. Out of habit, I reached for the bear spray on my left hip. Whoosh went my hand, no grizzly mace. Just a day earlier, Em and I had been convinced to get rid of our canisters on the grounds that they were dead weight and the rest of our journey would be out of bear territory. The worst part, our ill advisors were retired park rangers, locals. The conspiracy swirled in my head. The conspiracy swirled in my head. Perhaps this was all part of some nefarious plan for rural distancing. Remove outsiders from this wilderness paradise by all means necessary. Or a marketing ploy by the NRA. Headline, liberal hippie doesn't carry gun, mauled by cougar. Already standing, we raised our arms and yelled gibberish at the opposing creature. The cat took a step forward. Massive toes, concealing nearly as giant claws, contoured to the slope. I took the cat's dare and stepped forward, growling at my highest volume. Spit flew from in between my teeth, pathetically small and square compared to the mountain lion's massive canines. My move paid off. The cougar responded with a slow, undulating wave from the tail, turning the velvet coat of its body clockwise, strong legs supporting snake-like movement to reverse direction. But its head was static, yellow eyes staring us down, into my own eyes, and down into the pit of my stomach. Finally, we broke contact. Cat sauntered away, silently maneuvering its malleable figure through the trees. A few days later, emerging from the trail and into the small town of Northport for resupply, Em and I relayed our dark cougar encounter to the barista at a coffee shop. I expected an eye roll and an inquiry into how much pot I'd been smoking. Instead, she wasn't fazed. Oh yeah, we call that the chocolate coat. They pop up every once in a while. Must be some mutation in the local population. We were validated. I told her about the statement I found from Fish and Wildlife. Then came the eye roll. My family and a lot of folks in this area have been here for 4 generations. DFW's got one ranger out here. Why would we trust them? They don't know a damn thing about the woods or the cougars, for that matter. And before I move on to the next section, this is some art that is part of the book that my friend made. Sure, it's a low resolution version, but there you go. Marsupials and uncertainty. I trace over her collarbones with my hands, smooth hills and valleys to her neck, rhythmically pulsing, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, enough to see her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths of dreams. Sleep doesn't come easy tonight. Koalas singe paws, a wallaby choking on smoke, the ghost of Steve Irwin sobbing. It's a cruel and lonely business to watch a dystopian planet Earth in my head. I rub Taylor's arms, enough to bring her back from dreamland, but not so much she'll realize I'm waking her up. Her eyelids flicker open, and she smiles lazily. I've won. I heard that wombats are herding animals into their burrows to save them from the flames, she says in between yawns. They're finding little joeys down in the holes. She flips the topmost pillow and rolls over. Solo again, but with a newfound hope. I search the internet for answers. Unfortunately, it's from BuzzFeed. I gulp in wary anticipation of unfounded claims. Firefighters and regular homeowners report seeing wombats steer other species into their own burrows, then share the den to wait out the inferno going on above. One Aussie of particular wit tweeted, "I'm hearing reports of wombats ushering forest creatures into their burrows, mixing them a killer mango daiquiri, and asking them to kick back and listen to a few tunes." The blissed out marsupial image is a reprieve from the nightmarish scenes I've been seeing online. I am skeptical, and so are wildlife biologists. The scientific consensus is that the reports are likely half correct. Yes, a myriad of other animals will use wombat burrows to hide from predators and other dangerous elements, like bushfire. However, each wombat's burrow complex, or warren, is so large, complex, and varied that betongs, wallabies, and little penguins can easily spend a few hours underground without running into the landlord that might be snoozing in another compartment. And if there was an encounter, the territorial wombat likely wouldn't be too happy about the uninvited guest, evidenced by the crushed dog and fox skulls sometimes found deep inside those warrens. The latter, more academic articles aren't nearly as heartwarming. Another win for reason and Western science, and perhaps a loss for empathy in the spiritual dimensions of animal behavior. But is local observation or ancient indigenous knowledge to be ignored? We routinely discover new examples of interspecies collaboration. Take the viral 2020 case of the badger and coyote in Northern California, filmed hunting together side by side, utilizing a highway culvert for safe migration. A perhaps ancient partnership with an adaptive strategy for their new habitat. Now that's smart. I want to hypothesize with Taylor. I want to unravel my contentedness in not knowing the behavior of the most common animals, the virtue of holding faith in something that we've been told to distill down to fantasy. I think that maybe this is God a sense of connectedness and appreciation without completely understanding. I was raised in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, if a particular tradition even exists for a religion with such a smorgasbord of beliefs. I recall the fourth of 7 guiding principles, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Searching for life's purpose freely sure does sound more fun than doing it responsibly. I twist to the right excitedly, but she's already back asleep, shoulders moving with deep, slow breaths. Fearing she'll respond like a wombat awakened by an intruding echidna, I let her be. Eventually, sleep arrives. I dream of otters. Otters. Awash in pink mist at dawn. No, it was haze. Smoke clogged the skies east of the Cascades all the way to the Midwest. Wildfires forced me to reroute on 6 different occasions. Kids in the last town I passed through wore masks while they played outside. I'd found respite one morning on the southern arm of Ross Lake. My campsite sat on a small forested point with easterly views of Jack Mountain, whose summit looked to be cradling the sun in those early hours. Viewed through the smoke, it was a neon pink ball lodged in the mountaintop. I was submerged below the neck in the clear water, stripped of all worldly possessions and clothing, accepting of anything that reached out to me. To my delight, a river otter zipped by, surfaced, twitched his whiskers at me, somersaulted twice, and headed around to the other side of the point where I heard splashing and snorting. Naked but unafraid, I ran out of the water to get a view from the land. I'd come across the breakfast rituals of a local family. Just 5 yards in front of me, 2 rowdy otter siblings performed acrobatics over logs and flotsam like furry slinkies. On top of the largest log was Mom, who watched over the play, groomed herself, and occasionally huffed in my direction. Dad returned with a trout nearly as long as him and placed it before Mom, who, after inspecting the fish, promptly wrestled Dad off the log and into the water. This was either extreme affection or the fish was subpar quality. The faster the 2 pups attacked the fish corpse as if it were still fighting, thrashing it around so much that bits of flesh flew into the water. Mom barked at him to give it a rest, and he coyly brought it back to the dinner table log before ripping a section off the tail fin and diving into the water. Typical family dynamics. I stood and watched the intimate scene while feeling some connection beyond my dripping wet nude state that left me slippery as an otter. The sun smoldered and rose higher behind me, applying a sepia glow to the scene in the water. There's a photograph. Looks better in person. Firehawks. This morning's sunrise, filtered through mesquite branches and an eastern-facing window, turns the steam of Taylor's tea into fire wisps of marigold and amber. We're up early after a restless night. Taylor wears an oversized t-shirt that drapes down over the top of her legs, which are crossed, toes drumming to a beat of some silent tune in her head. I'm surveying the news. We both eat eggs, scrambled. It's too early to put in the effort for poached. I read that in Australia, the debate around proper forest management burns hot as the flames. Aboriginal people have used cool burns, low-intensity small fires used to clear brush and work other aspects of the landscape, since time immemorial. Cool burns can be used to target specific plants to produce desirable traits, like higher berry production and straight roots for basketry, or to coax animals out of the shrubs for hunting ease. Some traditional stories tell of crocodile hoarding the fire stick, eventually bested by rainbow bird, who brought fire to the trees and to the people. Not coincidentally, some kites and falcons, which are called firehawks by North Australian natives, have recently been recorded intentionally carrying burning sticks to spread fire. Fire is as much a part of the ecosystem as it is the human experience, spanning miles and generations, ingrained in both trees' growth rings and creation stories. When the modern Australian Fire Service does utilize prescribed backburns for wildfire prevention, they're still large, and according to some activists and scientists, destroy entire habitats. Traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, or the cumulative knowledge about the human-environment relationship that has been passed down and evolved over time, offers an alternative. The TEK regarding fires has been ignored or made outright illegal since the beginning of the colonial and settler era, a direct result of many indigenous groups' reliance on burning for culture and subsistence. If fire was essential to their way of life, then it had to be extinguished. Today, the mere notion of TEK as an appropriate addition to Western conventional science grabs controversy. In one recent paper, the authors refute the viability of TEK-based land management solutions simply because they weren't produced under a controlled setting, like equally segmented plots or laboratory conditions. Alas, said article doesn't mention the thousands of years that it took the knowledge holders to develop their practice, or the unfathomably large species sample size, n equals 1,000,000. Taylor nudges my foot. She's found some photos of the blaze in New South Wales, and we scroll through in disbelief. The flames look like hell, or perhaps our hell, gates open to swallow up the unsavory types in the outback that Bill Bryson and Robin Davidson told me about, but largely missed their mark and took the koalas instead. I recall a trail run last spring when I was dramatically forced off the trail by the start of a bellowing bufflegrass, a new invasive species to the Sonoran Desert, inferno. It was my first and only time witnessing the speed of an uncontrolled wildfire and feeling the distinct fear of not knowing how best to escape it. But what stands out is the sound. Crackling and seed pods popping and wind and shh and charred life in a steady crescendo that will peak when you're choking on the smoke. Watching a fire move towards you is staring down a wave cresting above you. Where do you go? We're silent for a while. She looks into her tea, swirling it around like she's been reading the loose leaves for an answer. What if the firehawks started it all, she says. What if they're trying to teach us a lesson? If it's true that these birds drop burning torches from their talons while their sharp eyes jerked about and refocused on the flames that engulf the forest and grasslands below, the collateral damage is shocking. Did they sacrifice their own nests in the felled trees beneath them? Taylor pauses again. It's hard to stay hopeful about these fires changing anything we've been doing, she says. Coyote. In July 2018, the northwestern corner of Montana was hot. Temperatures hovered in the low 90s until late in the evening when the mosquitoes would emerge to sing like sirens in the relief of cool air. I learned to trust only every other water source marked on my map, as most springs and streams ran dry that season. With a thick coating of sunscreen and sweat cemented to my skin, I trudged uphill on trails that winded through meadows of yellow bunch grasses and cracked parched soil. I was in the traditional territory of the Pend Oreille, Kootenai, and occasionally Salish people. I wondered how they traveled through these mountains so regularly with such ease. I felt white and fat. At the ridge leading to Blacktop, overlooking the west fork of the Yak River Valley, I sucked greedily in my water reservoir hose and scanned the horizon, checking off the peaks from south to north. Rock Candy Mountain, Mount Davis, Northwest Peak with a giant plume of smoke, another fire. I sighed and sat down to assess my options. The cloud grew higher and darker. The illogical but already familiar urge to make time and see the sights gripped me. I figured I'd keep hiking and get as close as possible. Upon reaching the valley floor where the PNT turns into another grueling road walk, I worked my way upriver towards Northwest Peak. I thought the yellow dividing lines in the pavement were odd, unnecessary. In a national scenic area, were folks really driving so fast and irresponsibly that they needed guidelines? I stepped over the body of a skunk, flattened, and an interpretive sign blasted by a shotgun. Perhaps any additional safety measures were a good thing. After a few hours, I was overtaken by an incoming fire crew in a cloud of dry dust. They rolled down the windows of their converted Chevy Suburban. You probably shouldn't be here, said one of them, gum chewing, bearded jaws on dirty faces, wearing wraparound-style sports sunglasses. I explained my route and predicament, hoping for either an exception or a hitch out to the start of the closure where I'd reroute myself. No sympathy. Aren't you here to hike? I laughed nervously, an effort that didn't get past these hardened men. Before they could leave, I asked what started the fire. Well, there's a lot of unburnt fuel up there. Hasn't seen fire in some time. They left, and I turned around to walk back in the direction I came from. Eventually, a Forest Service law enforcement ranger offered me a ride out to a safer trailhead. While locked into the most uncomfortable backseat I'd ever experienced, no arrests yet, we chatted through the speaker in between the dividing plexiglass. Officer Sandy informed me my new route back to the PNT was also the racetrack of choice for local drunks. She looked back. As a matter of fact, last Friday, one of those boys vomited right where you're sitting. We parted ways, and I spent dusk hiking uphill on the wide berth gravel logging road. My campsite options were slim. After several unsuccessful attempts in the dark trying to find a more secluded spot, one of which boasted fresh bear shit, I sidestepped the gate of an active clear cut. The site was probably selective thinning in legal terms due to the comically few standing trees. Each survivor stood about 100 yards from their closest living relative. They looked cold, bare. I felt the need to give them some company and pitched my tent with a resolve to wake up before the logging trucks returned the next morning. The sun wasn't gone long, and soon the opposing ridgeline glowed a ghostly white in anticipation of dawn. Still in my sleeping bag, I raised myself up and out of the tent, observing my surroundings in the peculiar light of far north country. I have near perfect vision, but the trees were still blurry. Muted tones gave the view an impressionist feel. Monet meets Montana. Up the hill from my camp among the stumps, I spotted an irregular blob. Not another erect sleeping bag, nor a young conifer, but fur, with a pair of acute triangles at 45-degree angles from its head. Coyote. Human eyes are made up of predominantly cones, allowing us to see the world in a sharply detailed, broad spectrum of colors. But we have fewer rods, so in low light conditions, we're left stumbling. Canines have the opposite. Many rods, few cones. From the human perspective, they have night vision. I could barely see him, but the stoic lone coyote was watching me. In the Salish tradition, Coyote is the leader of the raiding party that steals fire from the sky to carry the flame down to earth. The cunning, spearheaded character of most stories, he brings good to the people. Squinting and blinking, I observe the motionless ears from afar. I imagined an anthropomorphized version of him there, donning a wool shawl and judging me with his morning coffee. Eventually, he lost interest in me, trotting away and showing off his silhouette in the rising light. The sunshine reached me, and the air was smoky. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Blair. That was wonderful. I think furry slinky is going to stick in my mind as a way to think of otters for a long time. Yeah, this was so wonderful. So thank you to everybody who joined, and for both of our readers, Chandra and Blair. I feel like this was a really wonderful blend of like poetic nonfiction, but also so much wonderful information. I learned so much, and we visited so many parts of the world. To close out, I'm going to share another bird fact. And I'm really glad that Blair mentioned melanistic mountain lions, because we're going to talk about melanin in bird feathers. So there's two types of pigments in bird feathers. There's carotenoids, which are responsible for like the yellows and the reds and the oranges. And then there's melanins also. And the carotenoids come from bird diets. But what's really interesting about the melanins is that they are actually, they strengthen the feathers. So a lot of birds have dark wingtips because that's where they get a lot of wear and tear. And like falcons, for example, which dive really fast, they have really dark wingtips because they end up having more impact than a lot of other birds while they're attacking smaller birds. And there's also no blue pigments in bird feathers, which is really interesting. So if you ever find like a bluebird feather or a blue jay feather and you hold it up above your head with like sunlight coming down, it'll turn gray. And it's because the way that blue works in bird feathers, it's actually a result of the structure of the feathers. So the way that those barbs come together and interlace, it refracts blue. So it absorbs all the other wavelengths, and then all of the blue wavelengths are left refracted outwards, but it's not actually pigment related, and it's the same for green, which is really crazy. Okay, there's your bird fact. So thank you everyone so much for coming, and thank you to our readers so much for making this such a nice evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Winona and Zoe. Thanks, Chandra.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Everyone.
It was lovely. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too.